The nurse's shoes squeaked on the linoleum as she passed by for the third time, her eyes flicking to the clock above the reception desk. I sat in the corner of the hospital lobby, a paper bag of prescriptions crumpled in my lap, my coat buttoned up to my chin. The world outside the glass doors was already dark, the Maine sky bruised purple and blue, the parking lot empty except for a single flickering street lamp and a dusting of late November snow. "Is someone coming for you, Mrs. Harper?" the nurse asked, her voice gentle, practiced. I nodded, forcing a smile. "My son. He said he'd be here by 5. It was nearly 7. I checked my phone again. No new messages. The last text from Daniel was from the night before. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll be there. Get some rest." I had read it so many times the words had started to blur, the promise fading with every passing minute. The hospital was quiet now, the day's chaos replaced by the hush of night. A janitor mopped the far end of the hallway, humming a tune I almost recognized. Somewhere, a television played the news to an empty waiting room. I watched the automatic doors slide open and closed, each time hoping to see Daniel's familiar shape, his hurried walk, the way he always looked slightly out of place in a hospital, too young, too busy, too alive. But he didn't come. I tried to remember the last time he had been on time for anything. Birthdays, holidays, even my surgery that morning. He always arrived late, apologizing, blaming traffic or work or the kids. I used to laugh it off, tell him I understood. Life was busy. I didn't want to be a burden. But tonight, the silence felt heavier. The nurse came by again, her smile a little tighter. "Do you want me to call someone for you?" I shook my head. "He'll be here," he promised. I watched the snow swirl outside, the flakes catching in the yellow glow of the street lamp. I thought about the house waiting for me at the end of Pine Hollow Road, the porch light I always left on, the faded welcome mat Daniel had given me for Christmas years ago. "Home is where your story begins," it said in peeling letters. I wondered if my story was ending instead. The nurse brought me a cup of tea, her kindness making my eyes sting. "You can wait here as long as you need," she said. I thanked her, wrapping my hands around the paper cup, letting the heat seep into my bones. My hands looked older than I remembered. Thin, veined, the knuckles swollen from years of work. I thought of all the times those hands had held Daniel. As a baby, feverish and crying. As a boy, scraped knees and wild hair. As a man, distant and distracted. Always somewhere else. I tried calling him again, straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice small and uncertain. "Daniel, it's Mom. I'm ready to go home. Call me when you get this." The lobby emptied out. The janitor finished his rounds, the nurse's shift ended, and the receptionist packed up her things. I was the last one left, a ghost in a room meant for the living. I watched the clock tick past 8, then 9. My phone battery slipped to red. I thought about calling a taxi, but the idea of explaining myself to a stranger felt too heavy. I didn't want pity. I wanted my son. But he didn't come. At 10 o'clock, the night nurse approached, her face kind but firm. "Mrs. Harper, we can't let you stay here all night. Is there anyone else you can call?" I shook my head, swallowing the lump in my throat. "No, it's just me." She hesitated, then offered, "There's a rental car office down the street. I can call ahead for you." I nodded, too tired to argue. She helped me gather my things, her hand warm on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. I wanted to believe her. The cold hit me like a slap when I stepped outside, too. He wind sharp and unforgiving. I pulled my coat tighter, the hospital bag digging into my side. The rental car office was a block away, its neon sign buzzing in the darkness. I walked slowly, each step a reminder of the stitches in my side, the ache in my heart. Inside, the clerk barely looked up. "One night or two?" "Just one," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He handed me the keys to a small silver sedan, the kind Daniel used to call a grandma car. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. I slid behind the wheel, the seat cold and unfamiliar, the dashboard glowing with strange lights. I sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, I looked old. I looked alone. I started the engine, the car shuddering to life. I pulled out of the parking lot, the hospital fading in the rear view, the road ahead empty and dark. The snow fell harder now, the world shrinking to the circle of light cast by my headlights. As I drove through the silent streets of my hometown, I thought about all the times I had driven Daniel home from school, from soccer practice, from the hospital after he broke his arm. I thought about the promises I had made to always be there for him, no matter what. Tonight, I realized I was the only one keeping promises. When I finally turned onto Pine Hollow Road, the houses looked different, smaller, colder, the windows dark. My own house stood at the end of the street, the porch light still burning, a beacon in the night. I parked in the driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled. I sat there for a long time, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, listening to the silence. I wondered if Daniel would call. I wondered if he even remembered. I gathered my things, stepped out into the cold, and walked up the steps to my front door. The key turned easily in the lock. The house smelled like dust and old memories. I closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and let the tears come. I was home. But nothing felt the same. The house was colder than I remembered. I flicked on the hallway light, its yellow glow stretching across the faded wallpaper and the photographs lining the wall. Daniel's first day of school, his gap-toothed grin, a family portrait from a summer long gone. I set my bag down by the door and listened to the silence. It pressed in on me, thick and heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the wind rattling the window panes. I moved through the room slowly, as if I were a guest in someone else's home. The living room was just as I'd left it, the old blue armchair by the window, the crocheted blanket folded neatly on the back, the stack of library books I'd meant to return before the surgery. Dust motes danced in the air, catching the light like tiny ghosts. I wandered into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The clock above the stove blinked 12 on clock, its battery long dead. I opened the fridge, found a carton of milk and a half-eaten apple, nothing else. I closed it again, the emptiness inside matching the hollowness in my chest. I made tea, the way I always did when I didn't know what else to do. The kettle whistled, sharp and shrill, and I poured the water over a bag of chamomile, watching the steam curl up and vanish. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug, and stared at the phone on the counter. No missed calls, no messages. I thought about calling Daniel, but the words felt too heavy, too desperate. What would I say? Why didn't you come? Did you forget me? I pictured his face, the way he'd look away, embarrassed, making excuses. Sorry, Mom. Work ran late. The kids were sick. I meant to call. I sipped my tea and let the silence answer for him. The night stretched on, the house settling around me with creaks and sighs. I wandered back to the living room, pulled the blanket over my knees, and turned on the television for company. The news flickered across the screen, headlines about storms and politics and people I didn't know. I turned the volume down low, letting the voices blur into background noise. I thought about the hospital, the way the nurse had looked at me with pity, the way the clerk at the rental car office hadn't even asked if I needed help with my bag. I thought about all the times I'd been invisible lately, at the grocery store, at church, even in my own family. It was as if I'd faded around the edges, becoming less real with every passing year. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time Daniel had hugged me. Not a quick, distracted squeeze, but a real hug, the kind that said, I see you, I need you. I couldn't remember. Maybe it had been years. Maybe it had never happened at all. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight. I stood, my joints stiff, and made my way to the bedroom. The sheets were cold, the pillow unfamiliar. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind, the old house settling, the distant sound of a car passing on the road. I thought about Thomas, my late husband, and the way he used to fill the house with laughter and music. He'd died 5 years ago, quietly, in his sleep, leaving me with memories and a silence I'd never quite learned to live with. Daniel had been there for the funeral, but even then, he'd seemed far away, his mind already on the next thing, the next obligation. I wondered if this was what getting old meant, watching the world move on without you, waiting for calls that never came, learning to make peace with being forgotten. I drifted in and out of sleep, dreams tangled with memories. I saw Daniel as a boy, running through the yard, his laughter ringing out like bells. I saw myself, younger, stronger, chasing after him, catching him in my arms. I woke with tears on my cheeks, the ache in my chest sharper than the pain from my stitches. Morning came gray and cold. I made coffee, the ritual grounding me, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the snow fall in slow, lazy spirals. The world outside was quiet. blanketed in white, the trees heavy with frost. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I thought about calling my sister in Portland, but we hadn't spoken in months. Not since the argument about the will. I thought about calling a friend from church, but it felt like too much to explain. I was tired of explaining myself, tired of pretending everything was fine. Instead, I bundled up in my coat and boots, grabbed the snow shovel from the porch, and set to work clearing the walkway. The cold bit at my cheeks, the wind tugging at my hair, but the rhythm of the work was comforting. I shoveled slowly, careful not to strain my stitches, the scrape of metal on concrete echoing in the stillness. A neighbor walked by, her dog tugging at the leash. She waved, a polite smile, but didn't stop to talk. I watched her go, feeling the distance between us like a wall. Back inside, I made toast and sat at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I thought about all the meals I'd cooked for Daniel over the years, all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary days. I wondered if he remembered any of them. The phone rang, startling me. I snatched it up, hope flaring in my chest. It was a robocall about car insurance. I hung up, the silence settling in again, heavier than before. I spent the day moving through the house, cleaning, tidying, trying to fill the emptiness with small tasks. I dusted the shelves, watered the plants, sorted through old mail. I found a stack of letters from Daniel, written when he was away at college, funny, affectionate, full of plans for the future. I read them all, my heart aching for the boy he used to be. By evening, the loneliness pressed in so tightly I could hardly breathe. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall, and wondered if Daniel would ever call, if he would ever remember the promise he'd made. I thought about leaving, packing a bag, driving somewhere new, starting over, but the thought felt impossible. This house was all I had left of the life I'd built, the family I'd loved. As night fell, I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and whispered into the darkness, "I'm still here," but I didn't know if anyone was listening. The next morning, the world outside my window was a sheet of white. The snow had fallen all night, softening the sharp edges of the yard, burying the garden beds and the old swing set Daniel used to love. I watched a pair of crows hop along the fence, their black shapes stark against the snow, and wondered if they felt the cold the way I did, deep in the bones, a kind of ache that never really left. I made oatmeal for breakfast, stirring in brown sugar and cinnamon the way Daniel liked when he was a boy. I set 2 bowls on the table out of habit, then caught myself and put one away. The house was so quiet I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards as the furnace kicked on. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls, no messages. I scrolled through old photos. Daniel as a toddler, Daniel at his high school graduation, Daniel holding his own son for the first time. I wondered if he ever looked at pictures of me. I tried to distract myself with chores. I stripped the beds, washed the sheets, scrubbed the bathroom until my hands ached. I rearranged the books on the living room shelves, dusted the picture frames, polished the silver candlesticks I hadn't used in years. I found a box of Daniel's childhood toys in the attic, wooden blocks, a battered teddy bear, a stack of comic books. I sat on the floor, running my fingers over the faded colors, the worn edges, and felt the years slip through my hands like water. By noon, the sun had come out, turning the snow to diamonds. I bundled up and walked to the mailbox at the end of the drive, my boots crunching in the fresh powder. The mailbox was empty, just a few flyers and a bill. I stood there for a moment, looking up and down the street, hoping to see Daniel's car, hoping for a miracle, but the road was empty. I went back inside, made another cup of tea, and sat by the window, watching the world go on without me. I thought about calling Daniel again, but the thought of hearing his voicemail, of leaving another message that would go unanswered, was too much. I set the phone down and stared at it, willing it to ring. It didn't. The hours crawled by. I watched the shadows move across the walls, the light shifting from gold to gray. I tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. I tried to nap, but my mind wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about the hospital, about the way the nurse had looked at me, about the way Daniel had promised he'd come. I wondered if he even remembered. In the late afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart leapt. I rushed to the window, hope flaring in my chest. But it was just the mail carrier, dropping off a package for the neighbor. I watched her walk up the steps next door, her breath puffing in the cold, and felt the hope drain out of me. I sat back down, the loneliness pressing in like a weight. I thought about all the times I'd been there for Daniel, every scraped knee, every broken heart, every late-night phone call. I thought about the promises I'd made, the sacrifices I'd given, the love I'd poured into him. I wondered if any of it mattered now. As evening fell, I made soup for dinner, the smell of onions and garlic filling the kitchen. I set the table for one, the empty chair across from me a silent accusation. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying to fill the emptiness with something warm. After dinner, I sat in the living room, the television flickering in the corner. I watched an old movie, the kind Daniel used to laugh at, and let the memories wash over me. I remembered the way he'd curl up next to me on the couch, his head on my shoulder, his laughter bright and easy. I remembered the way he'd fall asleep in my lap, his small hand curled around my finger. I wondered when that had changed, when he'd stopped needing me, when I'd become invisible. The phone rang, startling me. I snatched it up, hope and fear warring in my chest. It was a telemarketer. I hung up, my hands shaking, and set the phone down. I stared at it for a long time, willing it to ring again, willing Daniel to remember, but the call never came. I went to bed early, the house settling around me like a shroud. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind, the creak of the old floorboards, the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. I thought about Thomas, about the way he used to hold me when the world felt too big, about the way he'd whisper, "You're not alone. I'm here." But he was gone, and Daniel was gone too, in his own way. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly seen, truly loved. I couldn't. The memories were there, but they felt like someone else's life, someone else's happiness. I drifted off to sleep, the ache in my chest a constant companion. In my dreams, I was young again, running through the fields behind the house, Daniel chasing after me, his laughter ringing out like music. I turned to catch him, but he was always just out of reach, always slipping away. I woke before dawn, the sky outside still dark, the house silent. I lay there for a long time, listening to the quiet, feeling the emptiness settle in my bones. I wondered if Daniel would ever call. I wondered if he even remembered the promise he'd made, but deep down, I knew the answer. The days blurred together, each one a quiet echo of the last. I moved through the house like a shadow, my routines the only thing anchoring me to the world. I made the bed, swept the floors, watered the plants that clung to life in the kitchen window. I watched the snow pile up outside, softening the world, erasing the sharp lines of fences and driveways. It was beautiful in a lonely way. I tried to keep busy. I baked bread, the smell filling the house with a warmth that almost felt like company. I wrote a letter to my sister in Portland, but tore it up before I finished. I sorted through old photographs, the edges curled and yellowed, the faces smiling up at me from another lifetime. I wondered what those people would think of me now, this older, quieter version of myself, waiting for a call that never came. Sometimes I caught myself talking to Thomas, his picture propped on the mantel. "You'd know what to do," I whispered. "You'd know how to make him remember." The silence that followed was heavy, but not unkind. I imagined his hand on my shoulder, steady and warm, the way it used to be. On the third day, I decided to walk to the grocery store. The roads were slick with ice, the air sharp and clean. I pulled my coat tight around me, the scarf Daniel had given me years ago wrapped twice around my neck. The world felt distant, muffled by snow and memory. At the store, I moved slowly through the aisles, picking up milk, eggs, a loaf of bread. I saw Mrs. Callahan from church, her arms full of groceries, her cheeks red from the cold. She smiled, but her eyes slid past me, already searching for someone else. I realized, with a pang, that I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. At the checkout, the cashier, a girl with a nose ring and chipped blue nail polish, asked if I needed help carrying my bags. I almost said yes, just for the company, but shook my head. I'll manage, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. The walk home was slow, the groceries heavy in my arms. I paused at the corner, watching a group of children build a snowman in a neighbor's yard. Their laughter drifted through the air, bright and sharp. I remembered Daniel at that age, his cheeks flushed, his mittens caked with snow, his voice calling, "Mom, look, I did it myself." I wondered if he remembered those days, or if they'd faded into the background of his busy life. Back home, I put the groceries away, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The house felt smaller, the silence deeper. I thought about calling Daniel again, but the fear of his indifference kept me from dialing. I didn't want to hear the disappointment in his voice, the impatience, the sense that I was interrupting something more important. Instead, I wrote him a letter. I poured out everything I couldn't say on the phone, the loneliness, the hurt, the longing for the boy he used to be. I told him about the hospital, about waiting for him, about the way the world felt colder now. I didn't blame him. I just wanted him to know I was still here, still loving him, even from a distance. I sealed the letter, addressed it, and set it on the table. I wasn't sure if I'd ever send it. That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. We were young, dancing in the kitchen, the radio playing some old love song. His arms were strong around me, his laughter warm in my ear. "You're not invisible," he whispered. "You're still here." I woke with tears on my cheeks, the ache in my chest sharper than ever. The next morning I found a note slipped under my door. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Evans, inviting me to tea that afternoon. I hesitated, the thought of company both comforting and daunting, but I forced myself to go, bundling up and walking next door, the snow crunching under my boots. Mrs. Evans greeted me with a smile, her kitchen warm and bright. We sat at the table, sipping tea, talking about the weather, the news, the little things that fill a day. She asked about Daniel, and I lied, saying he was busy with work, that he'd call soon. She nodded, her eyes kind, and didn't press. For a moment, I felt seen. For a moment, I remembered what it was like to be part of the world. When I got home, the house felt a little less empty. I made dinner, humming to myself, and set the table for one. I ate slowly, savoring the quiet, the small comfort of a meal made with my own hands. After dinner, I sat by the window, watching the snow fall, and thought about the letter to Daniel. I wondered if I should send it, if it would make a difference, if he would even read it. I thought about all the things I wanted to say, all the things I wished he knew. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling, and dialed his number. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I listened to his recorded greeting, the sound of his voice both familiar and distant. "Hi, Daniel. It's Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice. I hope you're well. I love you." I hung up, the silence settling in again, but this time it felt a little less heavy. I sat by the window until the snow stopped, the world outside quiet and still. I thought about Thomas, about Daniel, about all the ways love endures even when it's unseen, and I whispered into the darkness, "I'm still here. I'm still waiting." The days grew longer, the snow outside my window turning to slush, then ice, then back to snow again. I moved through the house with a kind of quiet determination, filling the hours with small tasks, laundry, baking, mending a tear in my old winter coat. I tried to keep my mind busy, but the silence pressed in, thick and unyielding. The letter to Daniel sat on the kitchen table, its envelope gathering dust. Every morning, I thought about mailing it. Every night, I told myself I'd wait one more day. I imagined him opening it, reading my words, feeling something, regret maybe, or just a flicker of the love we once shared. But the fear of his indifference kept me from sending it. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to force my loneliness into his busy life. Instead, I wrote in my journal. Page after page, I poured out the ache in my chest, the memories that haunted me, the hope that refused to die. I wrote about the hospital, about the nurse's gentle voice, about the way the world felt colder now. I wrote about Thomas, about the way he used to hold my hand when the nights felt too long. I wrote about Daniel, about the boy he used to be, about the man he'd become. Sometimes, I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he remembered the sound of my voice, the smell of my cooking, the way I used to tuck him in at night. I wondered if he missed me, or if I'd become just another obligation, another name on his to-do list. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the living room, the phone rang. My heart leapt. I rushed to answer, hope flaring in my chest. It was Daniel. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice rushed, distracted. "Sorry I haven't called. Things have been crazy at work. The kids are sick, and, well, you know how it is." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's all right, Daniel. I just wanted to hear your voice." He hesitated, then said, "I meant to pick you up from the hospital. I really did, but something came up at the last minute, and I figured you'd be okay. You're always okay." I closed my eyes, the ache in my chest sharp. "I managed," I said quietly. "I rented a car. Got home just fine." He laughed, a little too loudly. "See? I knew you'd figure it out. You always do." We talked for a few more minutes, about the weather, about the kids, about nothing at all. He promised to visit soon, but I heard the lie in his voice. I told him I loved him and he said it back, but the words felt thin, stretched across too much distance. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet, the phone still way in my hand. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I picked up the letter from the table, tore it in half, and dropped it in the trash. There was nothing left to say. That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields. He turned to me, his eyes kind, and said, "You can't make someone remember, no matter how much you love them. All you can do is keep loving." I woke before dawn, the house silent around me. I made coffee, the ritual grounding me, and sat by the window, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale blue. The world outside was waking up, but inside, everything felt suspended, waiting for something I couldn't name. Later that morning, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Evans, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a plate of cookies in her hands. "I thought you might like some company," she said, her smile warm. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea, eating cookies, talking about nothing and everything. She told me about her grandchildren, about her garden, about the book she was reading. I listened, grateful for the sound of another voice, for the simple comfort of being seen. When she left, I felt lighter, the loneliness eased by her kindness. I realized, with a pang, that I'd been waiting for Daniel to fill a space he no longer knew existed. I'd been holding on to a version of him that lived only in my memories. That afternoon, I bundled up and walked to the park at the end of the street. The snow was melting, the air sharp with the promise of spring. I sat on a bench, watching the world go by, children playing, dogs chasing sticks, couples walking hand in hand. I felt invisible, but not alone. I thought about Thomas, about the life we'd built together, about the love that had carried me through so many storms. I thought about Daniel, about the boy he'd been, about the man he'd become. I thought about myself, about the woman I was now, older, quieter, but still here. As the sun set, I walked home, the sky streaked with pink and gold. I made dinner, humming to myself, and set the table for one. I ate slowly, savoring the quiet, the small comfort of a meal made with my own hands. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am still here, I am still loving, even if no one remembers." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. The days grew brighter, the snow receding in patches to reveal the muddy promise of spring. I opened the windows to let in the sharp, clean air, and the house felt less like a tomb and more like a place where life might begin again. I found myself humming as I dusted the shelves, as if the music could fill the empty spaces Daniel had left behind. One morning, as I was sweeping the porch, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, heart stuttering, and saw a familiar car pulling into the driveway. For a moment I thought I was dreaming, but then Daniel stepped out, his hair tousled, his coat wrinkled, a paper bag of groceries in his arms. He looked older than I remembered, lines etched deep around his eyes, his shoulders hunched with the weight of things unsaid. He smiled, but it was a careful smile, the kind you give a stranger you're trying to remember. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice uncertain. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to steady myself. "Daniel, I wasn't expecting you." He shrugged, glancing away. "I had some time. Thought I'd check in. Brought you a few things." He held out the bag, and I took it, feeling the awkwardness settle between us like dust. Inside I unpacked the groceries, milk, bread, apples, a box of tea. He followed me into the kitchen, standing in the doorway like a boy who'd been sent to the principal's office. We made small talk. He asked about the house, about Mrs. Evans, about the weather. I told him about the snow, about the cookies, about the letter I'd never sent. Didn't mention the hospital, or the waiting, or the ache that had settled in my chest since the night he forgot me. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I watched him, searching for the boy I used to know, the one who'd run to me with scraped knees, who'd whispered secrets in the dark, who'd once promised never to leave. But he was a man now, with worries and regrets of his own. I saw it in the way he looked at his hands, in the way he avoided my eyes. After a while, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom, about the hospital, about not being there." I wanted to tell him it was all right, that I understood, that I'd already forgiven him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached across the table and took his hand. the gesture awkward but real. "I missed you," I said softly. He squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with something I couldn't name. "I missed you too." We sat in silence, the kind that feels like healing, not hurt. For a moment, the years between us fell away, and I saw my son, not the man who'd forgotten, but the boy who'd always come home. He stayed for lunch, and we ate together at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window. I made his favorite grilled cheese and tomato soup, and he laughed, saying it tasted just like childhood. Afterward, we walked through the yard, the snow melting in puddles around our feet. He told me about his job, about the kids, about the things that kept him busy. I listened, grateful for the sound of his voice, for the simple comfort of his presence. Before he left, he hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to when he was small. I held on tight, afraid to let go. "I'll call more often," he promised, and this time, I wanted to believe him. I watched him drive away, the car disappearing down the road, and felt something shift inside me. The ache was still there, but it was softer now, edged with hope. That night, I sat by the window, the house quiet around me, and wrote in my journal, "Sometimes love is just waiting. Sometimes it's letting go. Sometimes it's opening the door. Even when you're afraid, no one will walk through." I closed the journal, made a cup of tea, and watched the stars appear one by one in the dark Maine sky. I thought about Daniel, about the visit, about the way forgiveness can feel like spring after a long, hard winter. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Spring arrived in Maine with a slow, stubborn grace. The last of the snow melted into the earth, and crocuses pushed their way through the thawing ground, small bursts of color against the gray. I opened the windows every morning, letting in the scent of wet soil and new beginnings. The house felt lighter, as if it, too, was waking from a long sleep. Daniel called more often, just as he'd promised. Sometimes it was only for a minute, an update about work, a story about the kids, a question about a recipe. Other times, he let the conversation linger, his voice softer, less hurried. I learned to cherish these calls, to let them fill the empty spaces without expecting them to heal everything. One Saturday, he brought the children to visit. They tumbled through the door in a flurry of laughter and muddy boots, their cheeks pink from the wind. I knelt to hug them, breathing in the scent of their hair, the warmth of their small arms around my neck. For a moment, I was just Grandma again, not the woman who'd been forgotten in a hospital lobby, not the shadow waiting by the phone. We baked cookies together, the kitchen filling with the sweet smell of sugar and vanilla. The children argued over who got to lick the spoon, and Daniel laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I watched him, remembering the boy he'd been, the man he was now, and felt a quiet pride settle in my chest. After lunch, we walked to the park, the children racing ahead, Daniel and I trailing behind. He told me about his worries, about work, about the kids, about the way life sometimes felt like a race he couldn't win. I listened, offering what comfort I could, knowing that sometimes the only thing you can give is your presence. When it was time for them to leave, the children hugged me tight, their faces pressed against my shoulder. Daniel lingered at the door, his hand on the knob. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly, "for everything." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You're my son. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." He nodded, his eyes shining, and for a moment, I saw the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and wild stories. He kissed my cheek, then gathered the children and left, the sound of their laughter echoing down the street. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, full, not empty. I moved through the rooms, tidying up, humming to myself. I found a crayon drawing on the kitchen tab, a picture of me, Daniel, and the children, all holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. I pinned it to the fridge, a reminder that love, once given, never really disappears. That night, I sat on the porch, a blanket over my knees, a cup of tea warming my hands. The sky was clear, the stars bright above the dark line of trees. I thought about the winter, about the waiting, about the ache of being forgotten. I thought about the letter I'd never sent, the words I'd written in my journal, the prayers I'd whispered into the darkness. I realized with a kind of gentle surprise that I was no longer waiting for Daniel to remember me. I was no longer measuring my worth by the number of calls or visits or apologies. I had learned to find comfort in my own company, to fill the house with my own laughter, to let the world in, even when it felt safer to close the door. I thought of Thomas, of the life we'd built together, of the love that had carried me through so many storms. I thought of Daniel, of the boy he'd been, of the man he'd become. I thought of myself, of the woman I was now, older, wiser, still loving, still here. As the night deepened, I whispered a quiet thank you to the stars, to the house, to the memories that had shaped me. I knew there would be lonely days ahead, moments when the ache would return, when the silence would press in. But I also knew I was strong enough to bear it, to keep loving, to keep living. Before I went inside, I left the porch light on, a small beacon in the darkness, a promise that the door would always be open, that love, once given, could always find its way home. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized I was not forgotten, I was not invisible, I was simply unfolding. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more true stories from the women the world tried to forget, because every voice deserves to be heard, and every ending can be rewritten.